Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. All right. So we'll take up where we left off last night with the seminar on chanting. So we just finished with some comments from Srila Prabhupada, how he'd taken up his preaching and taken up the policy of his Guru Maharaj, which was no compromise. So Prabhupada, when he went to the West, he was thinking actually who would be interested. As soon as I start telling them no meat, no drink, no this, no that, they'll say, okay, go back to India. But he was surprised that people didn't. They actually took it up. So that was his mood, was no compromise. Whether people accepted what he was teaching or not, that was up to them, but he was just going to deliver the message exactly as it is, with no compromise. And on June the 21st, 1976, Prabhupada went to New Vrindavan, and he was greeted at the Pittsburgh airport. It was the closest one. So it was about a 90-minute drive to get to New Vrindavan. The ride was comfortable, and as we progressed smoothly along the highway, Prabhupada kept up a running conversation. He reflected on the fallen condition of modern man, telling Kirtanananda Maharaj his comparison of the dogs running on 4 legs and man's running on 4 wheels. So that was a comparison that he came up with when we were in Hawaii. Every day we would drive down from the temple to the seashore, and Prabhupada would observe the surfers, and they're doing their business, what Prabhupada calls suffering instead of surfing. And as we were going down the highway, he told us about this comparison, that dogs are running on 4 legs, you're running on 4 wheels. What's the difference? The business is the same. So in other words, why do you need such an elaborate arrangement for living? It's not necessary. So he said that the only way to save them was to start with the basics, and then after some time, when they become a little purified, then give some philosophy. He reminded Kirtanananda that this had been his program right from the very beginning. You've all got this experience, he told us. This is the only way. I started this movement on this determination, that I'll give them prasadam, nice chanting, and they will not come. They must come. So that was my determination, and I began with this. So this is the only way. Just give them a chance. No talking. Please come, chant, dance with us, take Krishna Prasadam, and go home. No talking. Kirtanananda reflected that it was just 10 years ago since he had first met Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada gave one of his endearing little sideways nods of assent. Yes, I never said that you have to give up this, you have to do this. Never said. Then gradually, Chaito Darpanamarjanam, when the heart becomes cleansed, then a little. So there is no hopelessness. So that was Prabhupada's mood to... What happened here? Computer glitching. Anyway, that was Prabhupada's policy. Just the simple people, they'll not understand the philosophy anyway. Their brains are too disturbed. So just feed them nice prasadam, engage them in chanting, and then after that, tell them to go home. So, no, that's better. Thank you. Actually, in 1976, when they started preaching in Eastern Europe, Prabhupada wrote to Harikash, who was kind of the main figure in that, and he gave the same advice. Just give them nice prasadam and chanting. Don't worry about the philosophy, that will come later on. He said, actually, people that are born in those kinds of areas, they have a sinful past. So he said, don't bother preaching or debating with them. Just kind of soften them up with prasadam and chanting. So December the 8th, 1975, Prabhupada was in Vrindavan. I had joined his party about a week before, and Prabhupada gave his Bhagavatam class. So he recalled how in the early days of ISKCON in New York, his neighbors would protest at the morning chanting. He said that in the beginning, that 26 Second Avenue, when our morning prayer was going on at 7, not very early, and so many of the other tenants, half naked, they would complain to the landlord, Mr. Judah, what is going on? What is this? Stop it, stop it, stop it. So Mr. Judah used to tell them, no, they won't stop. I can't say. You have to go to the police. So sometimes the police were coming to stop us, but we didn't stop. So that was Prabhupada's personal experience in 26 Second Avenue. So there were objections to the chanting right from the early days. Prabhupada wasn't fanatic about it, what he was doing. He was pragmatic. So if there was a chance to do things peacefully, of course, he would take that. But sometimes, when we had problems with the police, then I think I mentioned the other day about the council, city council. Prabhupada was willing to comply to some extent, but not if it meant that there should be no chanting at all, that he wouldn't compromise. So in 1968, Prabhupada got a letter from Chidananda. He also was one of the early devotees. And he had told Prabhupada that they were having problems with the police. When they went out chanting, then the police would become agitated and stop them. So Prabhupada replied to his letter. He said, regarding chanting in the street and being chased by the police, this is not at all good. The best thing is to invite people into our temple and chant peacefully. If a person can sell from 7 to 12 magazines individually, then there's no need of making a procession of chanters and thereby disturb the police equilibrium. If you can sell back to Godhead individually, as proposed by you, and some copies of our books, like Bhagavad Gita as it is, that will be a great success, and then there'll be no need of leading a procession of chanters for this purpose. So chanting was, obviously an important part of what we were doing, but Prabhupada adopted this policy as soon as his books started getting published. Then the devotees started selling them on the street. So Prabhupada was happy with that, and he's saying then there's no need to have a big Sankirtan party and agitate everybody. You just go out and sell the books. So there was a gradual swing over from chanting in the street to, just selling books. So sometimes he would tell us that we should, do things peacefully and not agitate the public. But if it came to a point where we would not be allowed at all out on the street, then Prabhupada took a different tactic. There was a kind of a bottom line that he was not prepared to compromise. So that was a letter from Chidananda. We had the same problems in Australia. They had the same problems in London. As soon as we got out on the street chanting, then the city authorities would come and stop us from doing it. So we had that experience in the early days of doing Sankirtan in Australia. As the movement underwent dramatic growth during 1972, harassment from city officials and police also increased. At a meeting of all the mayors of the major cities of Australia, it was decided to prosecute the devotees whenever possible and drive us off the street. So that was 72. I think we'd only been established 2 years in Australia at that time, and having a chanting party going up and down every day became an irritant. So every year in Australia, it used to be that way, the mayor of each big city, they would all meet together. And in 1972, when they had their mayor's meeting, that was when they decided to take the necessary measures to get us off the street. No more Hare Krishnas. So in Sydney, I told this already, but in Sydney, the devotees were being photographed daily as we chanted, and their names were taken in preparation for a major push in the courts to have us legally restrained. Considering the potential blow to our preaching if we lost the case, Sydney Temple President Charu Das wrote to Srila Prabhupada asking whether we should hire a lawyer to fight the council. Prabhupada wrote back the following letter from Dallas, this was September the 10th, 1972. So he says, "My dear Charu, please accept my blessings. I'm in due receipt of your letter dated August the 31st, and I have noted the contents carefully. Now, regarding this business of Sankirtan, the solution is to simply go on with your Sankirtan activities as you have been doing, and let them arrest us if they like. We will not stop. Just like in London, they became arrested so many times, and there was so much public display of arresting, that gradually the police stopped arresting, and now they have the freedom to do what we like. So if we take this case to court and spend so much money for big lawyers, and still if we do not win, then they've got a legal right to stop us. So better to forget this business of lawyers and judges and simply go on with your Sankirtan. That is civil disobedience movement." Yeah, so Prabhupada had a good rationale. That was Lord Chaitanya was doing, so it's not unusual to get arrested by the city authorities. That's our tradition. So let them fill their jails with us again and again, but we shall not stop our Sankirtan movement. Also, it may help if we get some public sympathy through publicizing our constant persecution in the newspaper journals. Gradually, the city officials and constabulary will become embarrassed to arrest us further, and gradually we will be allowed to carry on our Sankirtan unhampered. But I do not think this business of expensive lawyers and going to court will solve anything. better to simply become determined to hold our Sankirtan in our own manner as we like, and simply depend upon Krishna and his protection at all times. Hoping this meets you in good health. Your ever well-wisher, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. And then Prabhupada put a postscript at the end. He said, P.S. There's no difference between our chanting on the street or in the temple or in jail. A Krishna conscious person is not afraid of any place, but he wants to chant constantly in all circumstances. So that letter, that answered all our questions. We didn't bother going to the court. They did eventually bring a case against us, and they lost. And we were out, doing our business, as Prabhupada had said. So that determination that Prabhupada had, that was transferred to his disciples. So we had a few years where we got arrested. We had a few arrests. A few of the devotees were put in jail. There was a lot of newspaper coverage. We had the TV people there, TV news. And when they lost the case, without us even turning up, because we were busy doing Sankirtan, then they gave up more or less in Sydney. But in Melbourne it went on for about 3 or 4 years, constant harassment every day. And our Kurma Prabhu, I don't know whether you know him, he's a chef. He's put out about 5 cooking books. So there's a picture of him where we were chanting in the streets. Then the police came. He was leading the kirtan with it, playing the mridanga, and then the police 4 policemen grabbed him, a leg each, an arm each, and they upended him, and he's still playing as they're carrying him away, putting him in the police van. So he was one of the ones that had to go into the main jail because he had 8 days to pay off for his fines. So he fasted the whole time, and that was another tactic that we employed, that if anybody went into the main jailhouse, then we would just chant and fast. And then the newspapers, of course, they publicized that, the Hare Krishna fasting in the jail. So the publicity was on our side, as Prabhupada predicted it would be. That if you just go on with what you're doing, then people, will respond to that. So it was a bit, of a fight at the beginning, but we enjoyed it. Most of us were only 21, 22 years old, so it was an adventure. We had that youthful energy, and we had absolute faith in Srila Prabhupada. All right? Prabhupada says there's no difference in chanting on the street or in the jail. Fair enough. We were prepared to go to jail, but we were not prepared to give up our Sankirtan. So we followed Prabhupada's advice. Eventually, the case went to court. We didn't hire any lawyers, nor did we even attend the court. We simply depended on the holy name as Prabhupada had advised, and we were victorious. So, February the 4th, 1976, we were in Mayapur, and Prabhupada had received a report from the devotees in Caracas, in South America. Which country is Caracas? Venezuela. Venezuela? Okay. And when he replied that, then it reminded him about the harassment that we had had in Sydney and Melbourne. So I told Prabhupada that in Sydney they spent $10,000, the council, compiling a case against us. Every day they used to come and film us and take our names. And we didn't even contest the case, but we just carried on doing Sankirtan, and the judge threw the case out of court. So they'd spent $10,000. It was a big scandal, actually. People, the ordinary taxpayers one newspaper guy had calculated how much, time and effort and how much money they'd spent to bring this case, simply to lose it. So the judge, when he cancelled the case, he said, "Why not let them go on the streets? They add a lot of colour to the city." So even the judge had, maybe he'd seen us on the street, obviously, but it was very nice. That was a victory for the Sankirtan movement. Prabhupada was very pleased with that. Okay, so November the 2nd, 1976, Prabhupada was in Vrindavan, and again, there was this legal case being brought against us, the New York legal case, and Adi Keshwar, he was the temple president. He had been arrested along with Tridas, who was the Sankirtan leader, and they'd been charged with kidnapping, extortion, 2 or 3 other, like major crimes. And so Prabhupada got very fired up when he heard about that. He told the devotees, "Now you go around, this is a chance," he said, "to get established and officially recognized." So he wasn't at all upset that devotees had been arrested, or what he wanted was that we get a judgment whereby it would establish the validity of ISKCON as a spiritual movement. So wherever he started traveling, then he would immediately call a meeting of all the temple heads, like in Vrindavan. He called all the Goswamis and all the major religious leaders. He called them to our temple. He explained what was going on. We're being harassed by the public authorities. We're being accused of brainwashing and things like this. So he wanted them to give their approval for endorsement for going to the courts. So we did that, and the case went for 3 or 4 months, I think it was, and it came to the court actually in March of 77, and we won. The judge studied all the information. He came to the conclusion that Krishna consciousness had its roots in religious practice going back thousands of years. So he declared that ISKCON is a bona fide religion, and he dismissed all the claims by our adversaries. So Prabhupada was really, really happy with that. That was exactly what he wanted. So there was a discussion. When we first heard about the New York court case, Prabhupada was on tour. He was up in Chandigarh, and then there was a press conference there. And when the pressmen came, they'd apparently, they'd heard about the legal case in New York, and at least one of the reporters asked Prabhupada, "What about your devotees being arrested for kidnapping and brainwashing?" So Prabhupada said it's not true. Without knowing any of the details, he just immediately, gave his backing to the devotees. No, it's not true. And then when we finally got some reports from America, then they outlined the detail of what was going on. So just like this, one of the charges was extortion, and the prosecution, the way they figured out that it must be extortion was that one of the devotees in the New York temple, he needed some medical treatment. So the temple president, they'd estimated how much it would cost, and they asked this devotee, "Can you get some money from your parents to help with the costs?" So that was the original, that was the original exchange. But the parents, then they went to their lawyer, and then that was when they made the claim that they're trying to extort money from us. There was no extortion, but they kind of conflated it to make it look as bad as possible. Although the only thing that had happened was that we had asked this boy to go and see his parents to help pay some of the costs of his medical. So actually what happened with the legal side of stuff, there was this New York State prosecutor, I think his name was Michael Schwed. He was a young guy and out for a little bit of, that was his moment of glory. He'll take it to court and he'll make a name for himself. And so that let me see what happened. So what happened was that we were having this battle on the streets with the deprogrammers. One or two of the devotees, whilst they were distributing books on the street, then a car came up, they opened the doors, they grabbed the devotee, they threw him in the car and drove off with him, kidnapped him. And they kept him locked up in a motel for about a month. And they were doing whatever they wanted, whatever they could think of to stop us, or stop the devotee from chanting. So when they got him in this hotel, then every time he started trying to chant, they would put ice cubes in his mouth to stop him from chanting. And they wouldn't give him any food except meat, so they forced him to eat meat. They forced him to drink alcohol to make him normal. Right? That's their standard of being normal: meat eating, drinking, like that. So it did affect the devotee a little bit, during this 1 month. And after a few weeks, he said, "All right, I'll do whatever you want me to do." So then they thought, now he's back to normal, he can be let out. So he went out, he went through an airport, and of course our devotees in America, that was their favorite place for distribution of books, was in the airports. Thousands, millions of people are going through there. So this boy, Basu Gopal, his name was, he was flying somewhere, and he walked through the airport, and he bumped into the devotees that were selling books. So then he suddenly realized, hey, what am I doing? I'm a devotee. So instead of flying to wherever he was going to go, he asked the devotees, "I've just been deprogrammed, can you take me back to the temple?" So we took him back. And so the devotees, the leaders, they thought, we've got to fight this. And so we asked the city prosecutor there's what they call it, a grand jury. If there's some major crime going on or suspected, they form what they call a grand jury, and if they conclude that there's enough evidence, then the case can be taken to court. So we asked them to form a grand jury with the idea, that it would stop the harassment of the devotees. But what happened was that the New York State prosecutor, he held this grand jury. He never interviewed any devotees, only the parents. And then they decided to bring a case against us. So we were the ones that instigated a grand jury investigation. But, they brought the case against us and didn't even bring us into the conversation. So that was all at the end of 1976. And Prabhupada was, of course, in India at that time. So we were discussing in early November in Vrindavan. Prabhupada was, discussing about the court case. And we had some report also from Bhaktivedanta Prabhu. He was in charge of Southeast America, Houston, Dallas, like that area. So he said that there was some TV show, like a news show, and the TV people, they had brought in one of the local, I forget what they call them, like one of the local lawmakers. So this man was on the TV, and he said that these Hare Krishnas, he said, they're spreading like an epidemic. So he said we have to stop them, otherwise within 10 years they may capture the government. So that was it. That was his statement on the TV. Bhaktivedanta wrote to Prabhupada and told them that they think we're spreading like an epidemic. Prabhupada was very, very happy. He started quoting it wherever he went, that if they don't stop us, then we'll be spreading like an epidemic. So it was a fight, and Prabhupada was up for it. It was very tough. Yeah. So this particular day we were talking about the New York court case, and Prabhupada said, this is their feeling, that the Krishna Consciousness movement is spreading so fast like an epidemic, so we should take some steps. So Prabhupada turned to me, he said that in Australia you said there was one man had said that if the people take up this movement, then where will we stand? So in other words, if people started joining the Krishna Consciousness movement, what will our position be, the materialists? So they were worried, So that means that at least we had enough potency. Prabhupada liked that the more opposition that you got, that means the more potency you have for your preaching. If you are doing an activity and nobody says anything about it, then it means you have no potency. Yeah. But if you get strong opposition, that means they regard you as being quite powerful. So Prabhupada asked me that what was that they said in Australia, where will we stand if this movement is allowed to continue? So I told him, yes, there was a psychiatrist, the city council were trying to have us banned from the city altogether. They took us to court and we didn't contest the case and they lost. And then afterwards they worked out they'd spent $10,000 and so much manpower to try and get rid of us, and it didn't work. So one newspaper man went to a psychiatrist and he asked him, can you explain why there's this huge reaction against just a few people singing and dancing in the street? So he said, basically it's because the city dwellers feel very threatened by our simple lifestyle. So Prabhupada said, yes, just see, so this whole Western civilization is threatened. So that was one of his ambitions, to bring about a revolution. So Prabhupada was very happy at all this kind of publicity. Okay, so that was chanting on the street. In Chandigarh, Prabhupada met with some of the leaders, political leaders there. One of our life members was having a program, so he invited Prabhupada to come there. So on October the 18th, 1976, Prabhupada had given a Pandal lecture. They'd set up something there. There was about 4,000 or 5,000 people coming every night. And this particular night, after doing the Pandal program, then Prabhupada went to the Rotary Club. So they had invited him to come and speak there also. So instead of returning directly to the house where we were staying, that was a house that was owned by a man called P.L. Sethi. I don't know if any of you have heard of him, but in the early days in Juhu, when we got the Juhu property, he was hired by Srila Prabhupada to build an extra floor on top of the existing buildings that were there. There were 6 apartment blocks, which there were 2 stories, and they had tenants. So in India, of course, if you've got tenancy, nobody can get you out. So Prabhupada decided if we don't get the possession of these flats, we'll just build another floor on top of each building. So they were doing that. Mr. Sethi was a contractor that lived nearby, and he also originally was from Chandigarh. So just as a side note, the city council in Juhu Beach, they were very much against us. There was one gentleman called Mr. Mitra, and he was doing whatever he could legally to stop the ISKCON, getting this land and developing it. So we had a big fight in the courts and out of the courts, and the authorities, they got a court permit to demolish the temporary building that we'd built for the deities on Juhu Beach, and they had it issued on a Friday night so that they could do their demolition of the temple and over the weekend when the courts were not open, so there'd be nobody to stop them from doing it. And then their idea was that they would demolish everything over the weekend, and then on the Monday morning they'd go to the court and get a stay order. So as soon as you get a stay order, nobody can do anything. So Mr. Sethi, he came for darshan on the Sunday afternoon, and they'd already kind of half demolished the temple. So he was surprised what's going on. And when he was told, he said, "Don't worry." He said, "I'll make sure that the temple's rebuilt before Mangalarati." So he brought his son, he brought his contractors, and they set about rebuilding the temple overnight. And as they started, then some local gundas, they came and they threatened him. "We have 150 men, and if you attempt to rebuild this temple, then we'll destroy you." So Mr. Sethi, he pulled out a gun, and his son had a gun also. He said, "That's all right, you were 150 men, I have 200 bullets. You come again and we'll deal with you. We're not afraid." So they went away, they didn't come back. So he was quite a character. He loved Srila Prabhupada. And he rebuilt the temple just before Mangalarati. And then actually another feature of that, this the gentleman that was running the Shiv Sena in Bombay, what was his name? Bal Thackeray. So one of our devotees, he knew Bal Thackeray. So when they came to Juhu Beach to demolish the temple, this boy rang up Bal Thackeray and said, "There's a group of guys here led by the councillors, and they're destroying a Hindu temple." So of course they're extremely right-wing people. As soon as he heard that they were demolishing the temple, he immediately, it was a Sunday, I guess that's the advantage of being, a well-established politician. He went to a judge and he got a rescinding order to stop them from, doing the demolition. And then when that was delivered, they had to stop. Then after that, Mr. Sethi came in and rebuilt the temple. Anyway, so we were in Chandigarh, and we were staying in Mr. Sethi's house there. So before we went back after the pandal to Mr. Sethi's house, there was an event going on at one ex-politician's house. Where are we? So Prabhupada drove there from this meeting at the Rotary Club, and he was greeted there by the owner, Mr. Budram Goyal, his wife and their 2 sons, and his brother and other family members. Mr. Goyal is ISKCON's second life member in Chandigarh. Although he's not literate, he has built a successful electronics business and is a prominent social worker. So he provided all of the prasadam for all of our devotees when they were staying in Chandigarh, I think not exactly a dharamshala, but they were staying a little way away from where Prabhupada was. So this man, Mr. Ram, he paid for all the prasadam for the devotees for about 8 days. We had about 30 or 40 devotees there. So he was a nice man, and he invited Prabhupada to come to his home. So a small pandal had been set up in the driveway of his home, and about 30 people were in attendance, including Banarsi Das Gupta, who was the ex-chief minister of Haryana, Murari Lal Bansal, and Pandit Mohan Lal, the ex-finance minister of Punjab. So this man was very well connected, and that was why Prabhupada agreed to come to his house. So Mr. Goyal had invited Srila Prabhupada to come and bless his home, and Prabhupada was happy to oblige. So we got a nice surprise when we stepped into his house. Mr. Goyal took Prabhupada straight into a small side room where he revealed a set of 4 feet high, beautiful white marble Radha Krishna deities. The deities that were being taken care of by a pujari, but it was just a simple standard. So Prabhupada went in, he stood for a minute before the deities, then he spoke with the hired priest, and he explained to him that you should now change the standard. You go to Vrindavan and see how we're doing the puja there, and you try to implement as much as you can here. So then after that, Prabhupada returned outside, and they offered him an armchair to sit on in the driveway, and Prabhupada spoke for a few minutes to the gathering. He gave a wonderful explanation of the meaning and purpose of the Hare Krishna mantra. He said, Hare. Hare means Srimati Radharani, the pleasure potency of the Lord, so the transcendental potency. And Ram, if you use this word Ram, it means you will get unlimited pleasure. So Ramante Yogino Param. The great yogis are merged in transcendental bliss. Ramante Yogino Param. This is the eternal bliss. So the enjoyment of this material world is only for the time being, and it is a shadow of the true pleasure potency. So the real pleasure is in the Lord. So the meaning of the Hare Krishna mantra is, O Krishna, O Radharani, O Ram. The Mayavadis say that the Lord has no energies, but this is false. Actually, the Lord is the supreme energetic. The Upanishads say, Parasya Shakti Vividaya Shruyate. So the Param Brahma Lord has many forms, and the marginal energy, the jivas, are sometimes situated in the Vaikuntha planets and sometimes on the material planets. So they are called Tatastha energy. For instance, there may be many people who are the devotees of the Lord, and there are many people who do not accept the Lord. So even those who do not accept will accept him in due course of time if they undergo the proper guidance. So this characteristic that they are not accepting but they will accept later on is called Tatastha. So it is not that those who do not accept the Lord now, that is, the demons and the fallen, will remain as demons. No, for them the demigods are there, and the purpose of this Krishna Consciousness movement is to convert demons into devotees. That's it. As a madman can be treated by some medicine, and when the disease is gone, then as a sane man he can be useful to do anything. So similarly, the rascals and demonic people who do not accept the Lord, and whose numbers are increasing in these days on this planet, they can be treated by the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So by chanting the Maha Mantra, their hearts will become cleansed. Chaito Darpana Marjanam. So Darpana means mirror and Chaito means heart. So our hearts is like a mirror. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So by chanting this Maha Mantra, the hearts will be cleansed. So Chaito Darpana Marjanam. Darpana means mirror and Chaito means the heart. Our hearts are like a mirror. Since many, many births, this dust has covered the surface of the mirror. So we have to cleanse that. And what is the method to do that? That is the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. If you chant the Hare Krishna mantra, then this Chaito Darpana, the mirror of your heart, will be cleansed. So you see there are so many demons who never accept the Lord. But if they once understand the supremacy of the Lord, then their lives will be successful. So you yourself chant this Maha Mantra and you teach the same to your children. So the meaning of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is, O my Lord, O Srimati Radharani, please engage me in the transcendental loving service of your lotus feet. I'm fed up with service to Maya, so please engage me now in loving devotional service at your lotus feet. So that was a nice explanation, the meaning of the Hare Krishna mantra. Praying, I'm fed up, I don't want to be in the material world anymore. So now, give me the chance, cleanse my heart, let me go home. So, okay, in that pamphlet that I mentioned the other day, that Prabhupada first brought with him from India on his first trip to America, Prabhupada mentions there that there's individual chanting and there's collective chanting. So that means the individual chanting, of course, refers to doing japa. We sit down and we chant for a couple of hours on our beats. And then the general kirtan, that's for the public. So as far as chanting japa goes, I have here a brief overview of the process of, devotees taking up chanting the holy names through japa. And Prabhupada introduced the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra immediately, both collectively and individually, as soon as he landed in New York. So as people became attracted to the chanting, and they started taking serious interest in Krishna consciousness, then Prabhupada introduced them to chanting on the beads. So we've seen the pictures of the devotees when they started coming to the storefront at 26 2nd Avenue. Prabhupada immediately got them to make sets of beads for themselves, and then very quickly on Janmashtami Day, September the 6th, he initiated them into the chanting of the holy names. So some of those boys had only met Prabhupada a few days before, but Prabhupada picked them out and sat them down and initiated them. So that was the first initiations in ISKCON. And the purpose of the initiation, what it's all about, it means that one's individual chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra is sanctioned or empowered by the spiritual master. So when you take formal initiation, you actually are authorized spiritually to chant if you've been accepted by the Guru. So when we chant Hare Krishna, that means that literally we have Krishna dancing on our tongues. Through public kirtan, Krishna is available to everybody. And nevertheless, if one wants to be really serious about chanting, then the process is to take initiation, because it's at that point that one makes an actual commitment to the Supreme Lord to begin rendering service to Him. So we do chanting, in the public, so many different places. It's not, chanting is never casual, but at the same time, there's no commitment on the part of the people that are joining in with the Sankirtan to, become devotees themselves. But by that kind of chanting, gradually their hearts become cleansed, and then they may become serious about becoming initiated. So that was Prabhupada's main aim, to get people to the point where they made a commitment to the holy name. And from that commitment, then they would make rapid progress, as Rupa Goswami described. So that was Prabhupada's intent. Through the public kirtan, Krishna is available to everybody, but nevertheless, if one wants to be really serious about chanting, then the process is to take initiation, because at that point you make an actual commitment to the Supreme Lord to be rendering service to him. Casual chanting is also beneficial, but one makes more rapid advancement when one makes a formal commitment. So we see that within 2 months, Prabhupada started to initiate the devotees. So there's a process that we follow leading to initiation. In the beginning, Prabhupada was doing all the arrangements himself, because he was the only one that knew anything. But he was picking out the candidates and approving them. He was giving them the new spiritual names. He was chanting the first round on their beads, and he was performing the fire yajnas. So Prabhupada had to do all that himself. So in this way he began to guide them in the science of chanting. Then after a few more months, he started giving Brahman initiation to some of the devotees. Again, it's chanting, but the Gayatri mantra this time, with Prabhupada sitting personally with the candidate and speaking the mantra into their ear, and then giving them the Brahman threads. So in this way, Prabhupada began the process, the sadhana of chanting. Casual chanting was going on, but in this very specific science of sadhana bhakti, Srila Prabhupada was interested in getting people to commit themselves. So what happened? Krishna consciousness started to expand. By early 1968, there were 5 temples in America, and there were about 50 to 60 initiated devotees. Then from 1968 to 1971, about 4 years, by the end of 1971, there were nearly 60 temples, and there were about 600 initiated devotees. That means within that 4-year period, ISKCON grew 10 times. We went from like 60 devotees to 600, and the same with the temples. So Krishna consciousness from 1968 onwards suddenly exploded. It increased 10 times its size in 4 years, and then from 1971 to 1977, the number of disciples increased from 600 to over 5,000, and the number of temples went from 60 to 108. So this phenomenal expansion of ISKCON. And of course Prabhupada was having to deal with all of that. So that rapid expansion prompted Srila Prabhupada to introduce some innovations into the whole process of initiating people into the chanting of the holy names. He started to delegate all the different aspects of the process of giving initiation. By 1968, he had made a few Brahmin disciples, and he had started to install deities. He also started to structure ISKCON. In the early days, there was no kind of real distinction, brahmacharis, householders, sannyasis. But as things grew, then Prabhupada started to give some kind of shape and form to ISKCON and how it operated, loosely based on Varnashram system. So Prabhupada started installing deities. He started structuring ISKCON. We see that the first real ashram structures started growing up from about 1968 onwards, with the appearance of New Vrindavan, and then some of the bigger temples like Los Angeles. So the brahmacharis, brahmacharini, and grihastha ashrams became more distinct. And by 1970-71, Prabhupada started giving sannyas initiations to several devotees. So that was in Los Angeles. They just got this big building, the same one that they have now. And Prabhupada, early on, he informed the devotees that this is now our world headquarters. And he installed deities there. And then there was one lady, Shilavati, and Jamuna Dasi. Prabhupada personally trained them how to worship the deities. Then they went off to other temples and taught other devotees. So in this way things began to spread. Prabhupada had a plan at one point to that now he got this big building in Los Angeles and some facilities, that he would sit down there. His service, of course, was writing his books. That was his personal service. But he would have all the, leaders from different temples come to Los Angeles, get trained by Shilavati how to worship the deities properly, and then they would go back to their temples, and that way it was spread. So similarly with the sannyas order, Prabhupada gave sannyas to, I think, 4 devotees in Los Angeles in 1970. After that he went to India via Japan, and when he arrived in India to start his preaching here, or to start ISKCON here, then Prabhupada started giving out sannyas initiation, people like Jayapataka Maharaj, etc. So he had a plan, and in due time, gradually, as the resources became available, then Prabhupada started to expand things more and more and more. But that expansion, of course, means you have to have people to do it or help you with it, because it wasn't possible for Prabhupada to do everything himself as he had done in the early days. So he devised some systems to help him to cope with the very rapid expansion of ISKCON around the world, and to facilitate that expansion also. So it became obvious that he couldn't travel to every single temple, but people were joining in all these different places, and naturally after some time they wanted initiation. So Prabhupada started to delegate the responsibilities of giving initiations to his disciples. He did something quite revolutionary by giving initiations through the mail. Normally the system is that you have to be physically present, but Prabhupada couldn't be everywhere at once, so he started initiating people by them sending a letter requesting initiation. They had an approval letter from their local temple president, and when Prabhupada received that, then he would chant on a set of beads. Those beads would be sent back to the person who was initiated, and then the temple president would hold the fire yajna, and then the person would be given his beads, and Prabhupada also would pick out the spiritual name and send that, and then the person who was doing the yajna would tell the recipient his new name. So in that way then Prabhupada started to empower some of his disciples so that he could expand the movement very rapidly. So he instructed the temple presidents that now whoever you recommend and whoever's name you send to me, I will accept them. So he accepted people without even seeing them. Normally you have to judge, or you have to see the person, watch his habits, and when you're convinced that they're serious, then give them initiation. But Prabhupada was in a hurry. He was an old man, he had a short time left, so immediately he put it back on the temple presidents. You decide who should be initiated. I don't need to see them. On your recommendation and on their request, then I'll give the initiation. So as soon as he got some little qualified persons as his personal secretary, he delegated him the business of choosing the names. So the secretary carried like 1,000 names of Vishnu, and I don't know what other, I think there's 1,000 names of Radharani. So they had all these Sanskrit names. As people came and got initiated, then the secretary was deputed to pick out the name. One example that I personally went through, I got initiated in Sydney in 1972. There was about 16 of us that got initiated. Most of us had not been in the temple more than a couple of weeks. I'd been in the temple six weeks when I got initiated. Some of the devotees that were initiated had been in the temple about a week. But Prabhupada was, he wanted to expand rapidly, and to encourage the devotees, he was giving initiation to practically anybody that wanted it, just so that he could get some momentum going and spread the movement. So, and then the local temple president, he taught them how to do the fire, set the fire going. So in that way then, Prabhupada began to, he was very liberal in the beginning. Later on, when he got enough devotees, then he started tightening up and getting a bit more strict. So when I got initiated, and there was a kind of a system for giving names, that if the person, whatever the person's legal name is, then they would get some spiritual name, like similarly sounding. So like with me, my name, Kami name, was Dennis Harrison. So all of my friends, ever since I can remember, they all used to call me Harry. So my legal name is Harry's son. So when I got initiated, Shyama Prabhu was the secretary. He told Prabhupada, this boy's name is Harry Sauri, Harry's son, Harry Sauri. So like that, many devotees got spiritual names that sounded very similar to the spirit, to their Kami names. Not always, but that was the general way that he did it. So let's see. So for a while, Prabhupada continued to chant the first round on the new initiates' beads. The beads would then be sent in the mail along with the acceptance letter from Prabhupada. So that went on for a couple of years. Prabhupada could expand things by going through his secretaries, etc. But even then, it became impractical to send people their beads through the mail. So then Prabhupada innovated another way of doing the initiations. He wrote a letter to Bhaktivedanta Swami. He was the only sannyasi at the time in Europe, and so Prabhupada wrote to him, and he also wrote a similar letter to Kirtanananda Maharaj in America. And he says, this is like January the 4th, 1973. He says, my dear Rivati Nandan, please accept my blessings. Just now I have received some more requests for giving first initiation from Dhananjaya. Dhananjaya was in charge in England at that time. So now I am receiving weekly not less than 10 to 15 requests from new students. So it is becoming very expensive to send so many sets of beads such long distance, and it has become a little bothersome for me also. So I think that now you may be appointed by me to give first initiation to new disciples by chanting on their beads. So in America, Kirtanananda is going to do that. So now if you do it, you will be two. That will give me great relief. Kirtanananda will chant on the beads for the new devotees in America and Canada, like that. And you can chant on the beads for the European continent new disciples. They shall, of course, still be considered as my disciples. Not that they shall become your disciples, but you will be empowered by me to chant on their beads. And then they shall, of course, still be considered, so you will be empowered by me to chant on their beads, and that is the same effect as of binding the master and the disciple as if I was personally chanting. So no loss. They may continue to send me their letters of request along with the President's recommendation, and I shall give them the name, and it will be entered by my secretary into our records. Only I will send a letter of reply to you, and you will purchase the beads there and chant on them, and then send along with my letter to the new initiates. So is that all right? I will continue to deal with the matter of second initiations. The sacred threads do not require so much postage to send by airmail. So Prabhupada was practical. He innovated, certain aspects of the process, but it was still, the end result was that the new person would become bound, as Prabhupada said, to him as a disciple, and that was as good as doing it himself. So, a similar letter was sent to Kirtanananda the next day. The following month, just at the beginning of April in 1972, Prabhupada arrived in Australia, and when he did initiations, even though he was personally present, he had Madhavisa Swami chant on many of the beads. So even though he was in places where he was personally there, he was going on with this delegation and getting his leaders to fill in and do the things that he was doing himself. So with the Gayatri mantra, as he said, I can send that through the mail, because when you get initiated with the Gayatri, you have to be, the mantra has to be spoken in the ear, and also the first mantra is chanted on the Brahman thread. So now with his disciples doing the initiations on his behalf, then at least the first initiation was done by delegation, but for the second initiates, Prabhupada was accepting the recommendation of the temple presidents, and for the men at least, Prabhupada then would chant on their sacred threads, and that would be sent out through the mail, and with instructions for chanting the mantra in the ears of the candidates, and the local people would do the jagya. So that's pretty well how things went through to 1977. Prabhupada then, of course, initiated a different method with a letter from Prabhupada in 1977 in July. That was when he named 11 people that would act more or less in the full capacity as gurus. So in 1970, Guru Das was in Los Angeles, and he writes to Guru Das that I'm so glad to learn that things are going on nicely in our London temple. The most important point in this letter is second time initiation of some of the devotees, specifically Jaya Haridas Brahmachari, Jyotirmaya Devi, and Mandakini Dasi. So I am sending herewith the sanctified Gayatri Mantra tape and papers for holding the ceremony, as well as a sacred thread and special instructions for the devotees with the Gayatri Mantra. Now what we have to do is hold the Gayatri Mantra ceremony according to the instructions in the paper. Then at the end, you teach them personally how to count on the finger divisions. And then at the end, then play the Gayatri Mantra tape for them to hear, and let them repeat the mantras along with my vibration. So word for word, and then hang the sacred thread around their necks as usual. So that was another innovation, was using cassette tapes, so normally the mantra has to be spoken by the guru, but it's like separated energy. Prabhupada chanted on the threads, and then they were sent to wherever they were supposed to go. They did the fire jagger, etc., and then the president would play Prabhupada's tape of him chanting the Gayatri Mantra. They would hear that, and that was as good as doing, Prabhupada doing it in his personal presence. So in that way, then Prabhupada was expanding the movement. Although he does add that the Gayatri Mantra function should only be held in the company of devotees. Not just, it shouldn't be done in public. First initiations were okay, but the Gayatri initiation was more, intimate, if you like. So In this way, Prabhupada was able to expand this movement very rapidly all over the world. Thus we see that Prabhupada delegated all the different aspects of the process of giving initiation to his disciples, except for one. The application from the new devotees and the recommendation of the president still had to come to Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada had to at least be asked by the person, I want to be your disciple. And there had to be an approval from the local temple authorities. When Prabhupada received that, then he would accept. So that went on until 1977, and then even that changed. The function was delegated. What happened was that Prabhupada got very, very sick at the Mayapur festival in 1977. He did do one big initiation ceremony, but he never really recovered from his illness. So in early June, Prabhupada actually stopped giving initiations altogether. For a couple of months, although new people were joining, nobody was getting initiated. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj, there's a letter from him to Kirtanananda in June of 1977, and he says there that I approached His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada regarding the initiations recommended by your good self. So this is Tamal to Kirtanananda. Prabhupada said that for now he will not be initiating anybody new until his health improves. His Divine Grace did not suggest any alternative at this time, but he simply said that everybody should just wait. So this is true for both first and second initiations. Kindly inform Rameshwara Maharaj to inform all the GBCs throughout the world that until further notice, no new recommendations for initiation should be sent to Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada's health has not at all improved. Dr. Ghosh, who we were waiting for, has finally arrived, but he is not very hopeful about Prabhupada's condition. So Prabhupada's physical health, of course, was the impetus for him again delegating, or rather just stopping initiations. So there's a reason for that, of course, that when Prabhupada or the Guru gives first initiation, he accepts all the karma of that person so that the way is clear for him to develop his spiritual life. But accepting devotees means accepting their karma, and it can be a burden. So even for Srila Prabhupada, it was starting to become a burden because the karmic effects were coming to him. And he was already very, very sick. So at some point he stopped giving initiations until his health improves. So in 1974, actually, that happened. He got very sick. We thought that Prabhupada was going to leave his body at any moment. And so the initiations were stopped for a short while, and Prabhupada had all the devotees do 24-hour kirtan. I remember doing it for about a week. Later on, Prabhupada said that the reason why he got the devotees to chant 24 hours a day was because many of his disciples were not following the regulative principles. He was getting the reaction for that. So he said, I asked them to chant 64 rounds a day just to purify them. It wasn't for Prabhupada directly, of course, but it was to purify the disciples. So that way Prabhupada had to make various adjustments. So I personally also saw that whenever Prabhupada gave initiations, especially big ones, just like in New York, the last time that Prabhupada visited in 1976, about 200 devotees were initiated all in one go. So every time that I saw Prabhupada give a big initiation, the next day he was very sick. Yeah, he would get a flu or some weakness, some problem would come. So that was from accepting too many sinful people as his disciples. But he felt that he had to do that, of course, to spread the movement. So one or two occasions when Prabhupada got really ill, he stopped giving initiations until he had recovered. So in mid-May of 1977 then, Prabhupada was in Rishikesh. Then he took a turn for the worse with his health, and they rushed back to Vrindavan, and it seemed like Prabhupada was going to leave at any moment. So that was the week that Prabhupada sat down and made his will, last will and testament. Prabhupada called for all the GBCs, and when they arrived in Vrindavan, Prabhupada told them, now if you have any questions about anything that is not clear, you meet together, you formulate your questions, and then you come to me and I'll give the answers. So Prabhupada was preparing to leave, and he wanted to make sure that things were clearly understood before he departed. So he told the GBCs, you come here, talk, meet amongst yourselves, whatever questions you have that are not clear, you come to me and then we'll clear it all for you. So they did that. They had that meeting on May the 28th. One of the questions that they asked was, how will the process of initiation go on after your departure? So Prabhupada made it very clear. He said that he would name some men, and that when I give the instruction, he said, then they will become regular gurus. So whoever they initiate will be their disciples. And he used this phrase, that they will be the disciple of my disciple. And so also he said, they will be my grand disciples. So he made it very clear what was going to happen after he left the planet. That his disciples would become gurus, their disciples would be Prabhupada's grand disciples, etc. So that was all very clear. So the only thing that wasn't clear was that whilst Prabhupada was still on the planet, he was no longer giving initiation. But one of the etiquettes of spiritual transference, awarding initiation, so everything became very clear with this letter. Everybody understood, not with the letter. At that point in May, everybody understood perfectly what was going to happen after Prabhupada left the planet. And of course it was what Prabhupada had been telling us for the previous 10 years, that eventually he wanted his disciples to become full gurus themselves. So it wasn't anything revolutionary or mysterious. Prabhupada just definitively stated it for the final time. There was, however, one remaining problem, that whilst Prabhupada was still on the planet, candidates were coming, but he was not giving initiations because of his health. So he stopped awarding initiations in early June because of his failing health, but with a few notable exceptions. One or two devotees were accepted for initiation, but in general not. So it built up. There was a backlog of people asking for initiation. Tamal Krishna Maharaj was not taking them to Prabhupada on his instruction. So what was the resolution? So Prabhupada discussed with Tamal Krishna Maharaj in early July how to deal with that situation. And Prabhupada told him, he said, now I'm going to give you some names, and these people will act on my behalf to give initiation. So on July the 9th, this letter was sent out, and there were 11 names of senior disciples who Prabhupada said would now be responsible for giving initiations to the new candidates. So in that way, then all the functions of initiation had been delegated to his disciples. But there was the significant part about this was that it was a delegation of the one remaining function that Prabhupada had always retained for himself, that formally the formal acceptance of the candidate. So under the July 9th directive, the new candidates need no longer write to Srila Prabhupada, and the recommendations did not have to come to him. Rather, he said, new candidates should write to one of these 11 men, whoever is the nearest, and if they accepted them, then they become initiated. So, although he made a lot of, innovations in the process, the one thing that he had kept was the acceptance by himself of the new person applying for initiation. Now in 1977, he even delegated that responsibility. So virtually speaking, he was no longer involved in the process of giving initiation from middle of July onwards. That last delegation to his disciples had been given. Nevertheless, in that letter, although he said that whoever these 11 men initiate, they can do that. At the same time, Prabhupada said that the new initiates would still be his disciples, even though everything else had been delegated. But he wanted this etiquette to be followed. That he says that there's an etiquette that as long as the spiritual master is on the planet, the disciples who may be doing all the preaching, they should still bring the new candidates to him. So there was a letter to Achyutananda in August of 1968 where he mentions this etiquette. He says, "I've received so many letters from both of you. I'm replying today summarily, especially your joint letter dated July 27, 1968. The first thing I want to warn Achyutananda, do not try to initiate." So even as early as 1968, there were some disciples that were attracting a personal following of their own, and they were asking, people were asking them for initiation. So Prabhupada made the point very clearly. He said that do not try to initiate. You are not in a proper position now to initiate anyone. Besides that, the etiquette is that as long as the spiritual master is present, all prospective disciples must be brought to him. Therefore, if anybody is anxious to be initiated, he should first of all hear our philosophy, join the chanting at least for 3 months, and then if required, I shall send chanted beads for them as you recommend. So don't be allured by such maya. I am training you all to become future spiritual masters, but do not be in a hurry. If the family of the boy who is so eager to be initiated, if they are Vaishnavas, then let them offer you some place, because you are in need of a place first and foremost. In that place you hold kirtan daily, morning and night, as we're doing, and that will be the sign of their sincerity. So for the time being, hold kirtan as I have advised, and speak from the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Gita, and try to serve the cause of the Krishna Consciousness movement. You should not be attracted by such cheap disciples immediately. One has to rise gradually by service. If you get a place in Patel Nagar, that will be very nice. So they'd written from India. So at the end of the letter he says, now the summary is that you should definitely let me know immediately whether you can take charge of the printing works, whether you can distribute or sell the records, and whether in exchange of the records you can send me deities. So these services are most important. Do not be allured by cheap disciples. In other words, go on with your regular service. You're not fit to be the center of everything. You wait until you're qualified. Don't be allured by cheap disciples. Go on steadfastly to render service first. If you immediately become guru, then the service activities will be stopped. And as there are many cheap gurus and cheap disciples without any substantial knowledge and manufacturing new sampradayas, and with service activities stopped, then all the spiritual progress will be choked up. So know your place. Don't take on, the burden of something that you can't carry. So that was 68. There's another letter in 1971 to a gentleman called John Milner in Bombay. So Prabhupada says to him, as far as you're taking initiation from Brahmananda Maharaj, I have no objection, but it is the etiquette that in the presence of one's own spiritual master, one does not accept disciples. In this connection, Swami Brahmananda may write to me and I will instruct him. So naturally that was occurring sometimes when the devotees were going out to new places, starting up new temples. They were the leaders of the yatra there. New devotees that were coming on that didn't know the etiquette, they would ask, well, they were getting their inspiration and preaching from this particular person. So they were asking for initiation from them. And some of the men, they were thinking, well, that's part of the process. So they were questioning whether, shall I give them initiations? They wrote to Prabhupada and Prabhupada made it very clear. Disciples cannot initiate others in the presence of their own guru. So that etiquette Prabhupada stuck by. So Brahmananda was another one. There was another incident in 1974. Hansa Dutta, he was the GBC in charge of Germany. Same thing. He had started allowing devotees to worship a picture of himself and refer to him as a pure devotee. So that became very controversial. That was sent to Prabhupada. Prabhupada immediately stopped it. Yeah. So there's a tendency there, when you have a little success, people come and worship you or praise you or want to, but you have to be very, very cautious and do things according to the etiquette. So that was Prabhupada's mood all the way through. You see there from 68, from 71, now again another letter in 1975. Prabhupada was talking on the Chaitanya Charitamrita in Mayapur. So he says, Advaita Acharya is the typical example of how to become an Acharya. All our Acharyas, Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhar, Sri Vasudeva Gaura Bhaktivinoda, all of them are Acharyas because they are following the Acharya, the Supreme Acharya, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Therefore they are Acharya. Evam Parampara Praptam Imam Rajasho Vidu. So we have to follow the Acharyas. Then when we are completely 100% following the Acharya, then you can also act as an Acharya. This is the process. So if you become pure enough, then you can start being the Acharya or being the Guru. Do not become premature Acharya. It's a little warning. First of all, follow the orders of the Acharya and you become mature. Then it is better to become Acharya, because we are interested in preparing Acharya. But the etiquette at least is for the period that the Guru is present, one should not become an Acharya. Even if one is complete, he should not, because the etiquette is that if somebody comes from becoming initiated, it is the duty of such persons to bring that prospective candidate to his Acharya. So even if you make somebody a devotee by your endeavor, if your Acharya is on the planet, you have to take that person to him and he'll give the initiations. So this is the third time that Prabhupada had to say this. It is not that now people are coming to me so that I can become the Acharya. This is avamanya. Navamanyeta kahichit. Do not transgress this etiquette. Navamanyeta. That will be fall down. Just like during the lifetime of our Guru Maharaj, all of our godbrothers now who are acting as Acharya, but they did not do so during the time of Bhaktivedanta Saraswati, because they knew that that is the etiquette. Acharyam mam vijaniyat na avamya. So that is an insult. If you insult your Acharya, then you were finished. So if you're so bold as to accept your own disciples in his presence, that's actually a major Vaishnava aparad, and then your spiritual life is finished. Therefore it is said, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says to all the acharyas, Nityananda, Advaita, and Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda, they are all carriers of the order of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So try to follow the path of the acharyas, and then your life will be successful. So again in 1975, another letter. This one was to a devotee called Tushta Krishna Swami. He was the leader of a group of devotees that had split away from ISKCON. Yeah. So even during Prabhupada's own presence, they had one fellow that joined, is going under the name of Krishna Sai. He was an impersonalist, but he had some following in Hawaii. Then he met the devotees. He started reading Prabhupada's books and understood that, what the proper process was. So he disbanded his own ashram. His disciples were sent to various ISKCON centers, and he was given initiation as Siddhaswarupananda. And very shortly afterwards, Prabhupada also gave him sannyas. But what happened was that they couldn't give up their attachment to Siddhaswarup. They didn't like being in ISKCON, most of them, because it meant getting up for Mangalarati, chanting the same number of rounds every day, and going out in Sankirtan. So most of these people that came to ISKCON, after a short time, they were very kind of unsettled, and they didn't want to follow or be restricted by being in ISKCON. So by mid-1973, Siddhaswarupananda, he left ISKCON, and he took with him a very large, a fairly big group of devotees with him. And as a result of that, we had to shut down the Brisbane temple. They just abandoned it. They sold the Hawaii temple. They were trying to sell the New Zealand temple in Auckland. So it was a mess. And they regarded ISKCON devotees with, as anathema. And still even to this day, that group is there. And they're always got this paranoia about ISKCON. So ISKCON is like, the demons, because they didn't like to be told what to do. So anyway, it was a bit of a mess. So at least this one fellow, Tushta Krishna Swami, who had been in charge of their New Zealand operation, he did keep up writing to Srila Prabhupada and getting advice from him. So it wasn't a complete abandonment, and Prabhupada carried on trying to encourage them to, come back into the organization and help with the preaching. Very few of them did. A few did, but not many. And Siddhaswarupananda, he absolutely flatly refused to work in any way with ISKCON, even though Prabhupada personally requested him. So it was a sticky situation for a while. We had people just suddenly abandoning the temple. In New Zealand, they took the deities of Radha Giridhari, packed them away in boxes, and they were going to send them back to the Sydney temple, because another one of their complaints was that was about doing deity worship. If you have deities, then you have, schedules, standards. You have to do a certain amount of, offerings every day. So it's a commitment from, 4 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, which they did not want. They wanted to just be able to chant Hare Krishna, and the propaganda was that if you just chant Hare Krishna, you don't need to do anything else. Yeah. The chanting is the important thing. Anyway, so there was a lot of disturbance. But Tushta Krishna Swami, he was one, after Siddhaswarup, he was their main preaching figure. So he used to still write to Prabhupada. Siddhaswarup never wrote to Prabhupada. He was off, in his own space there. But at least Tushta Krishna had some respect. So he would write reports to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada would write back and encourage him. All right, if you can't stay in ISKCON, but don't give up the preaching, don't change the philosophy, just preach, even if you don't like doing it in ISKCON. So in this letter to Tushta Krishna Swami, he tells him, you keep trained very rigidly, and then you are a bona fide guru, and you can accept disciples in the same principle. But as a matter of etiquette, it is the custom that during the lifetime of your spiritual master, you bring the prospective disciples to him, and in his absence or disappearance, then you can accept disciples without any limitation. So this is the law of disciplic succession. I want to see my disciples become bona fide spiritual masters and spread Krishna consciousness very widely. That will make me and Krishna very happy. So he knew their tendency. They'd already split away. Still he was warning him, don't accept any disciples in my presence. Even you're not completely in ISKCON anymore, but you must follow this spiritual etiquette. So that way, that was the end of 1975. So when it came to 1977, Prabhupada was very sick. He stopped initiating, and then he sent this letter out with these 11 names on it. But although they were doing the full scope of initiation, every aspect of it, even Prabhupada didn't have to be informed anymore. They didn't have to write to Prabhupada to get his permission to be initiated. But Prabhupada held on and still enforced this etiquette that nobody should be initiated in his presence. So he'd already told us what would happen after he disappeared. That was very clear. You know, you would be Prabhupada's grandsons. But as far as this etiquette, Prabhupada still maintained that. So these 11 men, then they were not, although they were doing the whole process of giving initiation, still Prabhupada said that whoever they initiate are still my disciples until I leave, even though he was not involved in the process anymore. So the question may be asked why Prabhupada stopped giving initiations in June and then introduced this new procedure in July. So the answer lies in understanding the internal aspect of the Guru awarding initiations. So some people got confused by that letter. Some people, used that letter to form their own group, the Ritviks, so-called Ritviks, so that, there was some misunderstandings. So Prabhupada spoke this, Tamal Krishna Maharaj wrote this, what Prabhupada had told him, to Satsvarup Maharaj. So he says, please accept my humble obeisances at your feet. I have been instructed by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, to reply to your letter of July 25th, 1977. So this is 2 weeks after Prabhupada sent that letter out with the 11 names. So he says, Srila Prabhupada explained the difference between first and second initiation as follows. Why do you believe in rumors that first initiation is not so important as second? I have already said that it is equally important, but you are saying rumors. Actually, first initiation is more important. So some people were thinking, first initiation is given out very easily, so it's not, it's not the real initiation. The real initiation is Diksha, or second initiation. So now Prabhupada is saying, no, actually the first initiation is more important. So you can go without second initiation, but the first initiation is executed very thoroughly, that it is sufficient. So first initiation, it stands strong. The spiritual master accepts the disciples' sinful reactions upon giving first initiation. That's why it's so important, because that relieving them of their bad previous karma. The Vedic system was to give the sacred thread at the first initiation, but we are following Pancharatric Vidhi. So that is not possible in this age. Therefore, he has to be prepared by Harinam initiation, and then they can be given second initiation. He is given a chance. Therefore, others protest that I am giving initiation to people who are not born of Brahmin families. And they ask, how can he be initiated? So this was the process. Pancharatri, the regular Vedic standard was there was one Diksha initiation. That was all that was required. But as we come into Kali Yuga, the and especially in Lord Chaitanya's movement, this Pancharatri Vidhi, that was introduced. So that's like a slower method of making people fit for initiation. So you get first initiation, you follow the principles for some time. After you come up to the standard, then you can be initiated, second, Diksha. But the point, Prabhupada's point here is that it's not even required actually to worship the deity or to have second initiation. The first thing is that you get your real connection through first initiation. So that was what he was instructing to Tamal. Tamal sent that to Satsvarup Maharaj. This letter is consistent with other statements made directly by Srila Prabhupada. So there's about 4 or 5 evidences there about initiations and the etiquette. So September 1972, Prabhupada sent a letter to Jadharani. So he says, the spiritual master accepts the sinful activities of his disciples from the first initiation. I may give initiation very easily, but what can I do? I am prepared to go to hell for the service of Lord Chaitanya. So that accusation was there, or concern was there, that Prabhupada was giving initiations very freely. This is not correct. He was criticized by some of his godbrothers and others for doing that. But Prabhupada's rationale was that they have to be initiated, otherwise how will they make progress? And I'm prepared to go to hell, if necessary, to continue that process. So there's another talk about this principle, from 1972. We have a book called Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers. You've all seen that book. So that was a discussion with a young man from America. He was with the American Peace Corps at that time. He met the devotees. He was fortunate enough that he traveled to Mayapur. 1972 in Mayapur there was a grass hut. There were no buildings or anything, but Prabhupada was staying there. So this boy, Bob Cohen, he came. He asked a lot of nice questions. Later on, in 1976, he was initiated as Brahma Tirtha. So that's that book. So in the questions and answers book, there's this exchange going on between Bob Cohen and Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada's telling him, we should be very much cautious that for my sinful actions, my spiritual master will suffer. So I'll not commit even a pinch of sinful activity. This is the duty of the disciple. After initiation, all sinful reaction is finished. Now, if he again commits sinful activities, then his spiritual master has to suffer. So a disciple should be sympathetic and consider this, that for my sinful activities, my spiritual master will have to suffer. So I'll not commit even a pinch of sinful activities. If the spiritual master is attacked by some disease, it is due to the sinful activities of others. Don't make many disciples. That was his advice. And these sicknesses Prabhupada was getting, that was because his disciples were not following properly. So you have to be considerate to your spiritual master and not overload him with sinful activity. So, but it is due to sinful activities. Don't make many disciples, but we do it because we are preaching. Never mind, let us suffer, still we shall accept them. Therefore, your question was, when I suffer, is it due to my past misdeeds? That was your question. So this is my misdeed, that I accepted some disciples who were nonsense. That is my misdeed. So Bob Cohen had been told, that you get sinful reactions, there's karma, and so for that you have to suffer somewhere and another. So he saw Prabhupada was sick, so he was thinking, well, you're supposed to be the pure devotee, how is it that you're sick? So Prabhupada explained, that's not my karma, from my activities, this is from accepting other sinful people as my disciples. So Bob Cohen asked Prabhupada, so this happens on occasion? So Prabhupada said, yes, this is sure to happen because we are accepting so many men. It is the duty of the disciples to be cautious. My spiritual master has saved me. I should not put him again into suffering. That should be the mood of the disciple. So when the spiritual master is in suffering, Krishna saves him. Krishna thinks, oh, he has taken so much responsibility for delivering a fallen person. So Krishna is there. Kantiya pratajanihi name bhakta pranashyati. O son of Kunti, declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes. So because the spiritual master takes the risk on account of Krishna, therefore this suffering comes. So Baba asked him, he said, you're suffering, but it's not the same kind of pain. So Prabhupada said, no, it is not due to karma. The pain is there sometimes so that the disciple may know, oh, due to our sinful activities, our spiritual master is suffering. So that was that conversation. Again, this one's in the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam, 8th Canto, Chapter 4, verse 15. Same topic. So Prabhupada says there that a devotee sometimes accepts a sinful person as his disciple to counteract the sinful reactions, and to counteract the sinful reactions he accepts from the disciple, he has to see a bad dream. So sometimes the physical manifestation of the bad karma would come, but sometimes it was a mental disturbance also. So the Guru has to suffer in so many different ways just to save somebody from going to hell. So Prabhupada says there that nonetheless, the spiritual master is so kind that in spite of having bad dreams due to the sinful disciple, he accepts this troublesome business for the deliverance of the victims of Kali Yuga. After initiation, therefore, a disciple should be extremely careful not to commit sin again, because that might cause difficulties for himself and the spiritual master. Before the deity, before the fire, before the spiritual master, and before the Vaishnavas, the honest disciple promises to refrain from all sinful activity. Therefore, he must not again commit sinful acts and thus create a troublesome situation. So that's in the purport. And I actually had a kind of observation of that in Srila Prabhupada, as I said, whenever he gave big initiations, the next day he would get sick. But this thing of seeing a bad dream, because Prabhupada's not going to mention that, to us directly. But one evening, after I'd given Prabhupada his second massage in the night time, and I went to the bathroom. When I came back, I had to cross before Prabhupada's room that he was staying. This was at the Hyderabad farm. And as I was passing by, Prabhupada suddenly called out, "Oh!" like this, very loudly. And then I stopped and listened, and he was still asleep. And that reminded me of what Prabhupada had said in this purport, that sometimes the spiritual master in his dreams, he has to suffer some, turbulence or disturbance. So I heard Prabhupada like that. So we really, really don't know what, our gurus are doing for us. We're all from Kali Yuga. But the sacrifices involved in becoming a spiritual master and also becoming a disciple Yeah, it's there. It's a very real thing. So we have to be very, very cautious about how we execute our devotional service, so that our spiritual master may not be disturbed, may not be afflicted, by our bad deeds. So again, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, 9th canto, 9th chapter, verse 5, in the purport, Prabhupada says, sometimes the spiritual master, after accepting a disciple, must take charge of that disciple's past sinful activities, and being overloaded, sometimes he may suffer, if not fully, then partially, for the sinful acts of his disciple. Every disciple, therefore, must be very careful not to commit sinful activities after initiation. The poor spiritual master is kind and merciful enough to accept a disciple and partially suffer for that disciple's sinful activities. But Krishna, being merciful to his servant, he neutralizes these reactions for sinful deeds for the servant who engages in preaching his glories. So there's a dynamic going on. Krishna's in the heart. There's no way you can hide what you're thinking or doing. Of course, one concession in Kali Yuga is that there's no sinful reaction for thinking something sinful. But as soon as you put it into action, then there's a reaction. So we have to be very careful. And we have to realize and appreciate the help that's being given, to pluck us out of the mire of Kali Yuga and take us back to Godhead. It's not a simple thing. It's not a cheap thing. Again, another... This letter is from Bhaktivedanta Swami. He was one of Prabhupada's disciples that was preaching here in South India. So in 1974, Prabhupada had been, in the middle of the year, Prabhupada had rushed back to Vrindavan. He was having some kind of health crisis. He nearly left his body at that time. So devotees were coming and praying. That was when Prabhupada asked the devotees all around the world to chant 24-hour kirtan, and they did that for about a week or so. And Prabhupada was in Vrindavan, just on the verge of leaving. Somehow or another he pulled through that and recouped his health, and then he was able to travel again. So Panchadravida Maharaj, he sent a letter, he was there, and he sent a letter to Jayadvaita, now Swami, but in those days he was a brahmachari. So he says, I've received your letter of August 23rd, 1974, and have noted the contents. Mahamsa Swami recently returned from Vrindavan, where he was summoned by Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada had just ended a 7-day fast when Mahamsa Swami arrived, and now he is just beginning to eat again. His Divine Grace had been very ill. Mahamsa Swami described Srila Prabhupada as being very pale, and for the first time he said he looked very old. So his Divine Grace was very weak, and when he talked, it was very slowly, one word at a time, and that also in a soft whisper. Very serious condition. Prabhupada said that this was not a normal illness, but it was caused by 90% of his disciples not following the devotional principles. Therefore, Prabhupada had said that he requested this 24-hour continuous kirtan to purify the devotees. He had refused to take any medicine, and he repeated that Sankirtan is the only cure. So from Prabhupada's point of view, he was suffering all this difficulty, but he was prepared to do that to purify his disciples. But if his disciples didn't take it seriously, then there was a big problem all around. So, one last snippet of a conversation about this topic of, not accepting disciples if you're ill. So there was a room conversation in October 18th, 1977. So this, of course, was the last few weeks Prabhupada was on the planet. This is a couple of weeks or months after Prabhupada had sent out that letter, with those 11 names on it. And Prabhupada spent his last 6 weeks in Vrindavan. We had brought him from Bombay. I'm not sure I mentioned this. I think I did, that I went ahead to Vrindavan from Bombay and set things up. So that was the last 6 weeks Prabhupada was staying there in Vrindavan. And one afternoon, October the 18th, the devotees informed Srila Prabhupada that there was a gentleman, a Bengali gentleman, who had come in from New York, and he wanted to take initiation from Prabhupada. As far as I understand, I might not be completely accurate on this, but Prabhupada had met this man in New York in 1976, and in fact he had known him from the 1950s because this man had been a member of the Gaudiya Math. Later on he fell in Maya, he moved to America, but Prabhupada knew him from the 1950s. So now this man, his name is Roy Chowdhury, he in 76 had come to see Prabhupada because ISKCON, of course, had grown up, and he wanted to get involved, at least to some degree or another, although he was still working and doing his business. So Prabhupada was happy to see him. He encouraged him as much as he could. So in 1977, the news came Prabhupada's going to leave very soon. So this man thought, I haven't been initiated. I want initiation from Srila Prabhupada. So he flew from New York to Delhi and then came to Vrindavan. So his quest was that Prabhupada would initiate him before he left the planet. So Prabhupada was told, one Bengali gentleman has come from New York. No, sorry, Prabhupada said that. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, yes, Mr. Sukamal Roy Chowdhury. So Prabhupada replied that, I have deputed some of you to initiate. So Tamal said, yes. So Prabhupada said, so I think that Jayapataka can do it if he likes. I have already deputed, so you can tell him. So this is another evidence that Prabhupada had in fact passed over all the functions and duties of the Guru now onto his disciple, and that these 11 men that are named there, they would become fully fledged gurus. So Prabhupada asked that Jayapataka is there. So Tamal says yes. So Prabhupada said, so the deputies, Jayapataka's name is there. Bhagavan said, it's already on there, Srila Prabhupada, his name was on the list. So Prabhupada said, so I depute him to do this in Mayapur, and you may go with him. I will stop for the time being. Is that all right? So Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he said, stop what, Srila Prabhupada? And Prabhupada says, this initiation, his giving initiation. I have deputed my disciples. Is it clear or not? Giriraj said, yes, it's clear. So Prabhupada asked him, you have got the list of names? Yes, Srila Prabhupada. So then Prabhupada said, if by Krishna's grace I recover from this condition, then I shall begin again. Means again start giving initiations. Or I may not be pressed in this condition to initiate. It is not good. So there's enough evidence there about, karma, suffering, the real relation, the inner relationship between the Guru, Krishna, and the disciple. It's very, very clear what was going on. Prabhupada gradually, right from the first initiation ceremony in New York on September the 6th, 1966, that was Janmashtami, Prabhupada started giving initiations. He was doing everything himself. And now at the very end, after 11 or 12 years preaching, in 1977, just before he left the planet, he made that arrangement. Now his disciples would fully take up all the functions of being a guru, and he would be relieved from that and not have to suffer any burden from having all these unqualified disciples. So it's 10 o'clock. I'm getting a bit croaky here. I think there's just, all right. So there's just one more paragraph and then we'll stop for this morning. So it's clear from this how Prabhupada delegated to his disciples all of these different aspects of the process of giving initiation into the chanting of the holy names. From the very beginning of ISKCON's existence, he started doing it, and the letter from July 77 was the final delegation, that's all. It was in the specific context of Prabhupada still being on the planet, but not doing the process himself. It was with the understanding, finalized on May 28, 1977, that when he disappeared, then the process of initiation, the acceptance of disciples, that would go to his disciples completely. So that's pretty clear, I think. Somehow or another, some people don't think it's clear, but when you really look at all the, the references, it's very clear what Prabhupada was doing. So that's, we had started this morning by looking at the aspects of chanting japa. I explained yesterday that Prabhupada's mission was to try to get people not to just chant Hare Krishna, but to make a commitment to chant Hare Krishna. That commitment means getting initiated. Yeah, when you say, yes, now I'll avoid all these sinful activities, I'll chant a certain number of rounds every day. That's a commitment. And that's what Prabhupada was looking for in his mission, at least get them to the first initiation. Right? We heard there that Prabhupada said first initiation is more important than the second initiation. So that was his mission, get people chanting, but not casually. They'll start off in a casual way. Somebody's walking down the street, they hear the devotees chanting, they get some interest like that. That's fine. But the real business is when you get initiated. That's when you're committed to the process. And, there's obligations that go with that. So Prabhupada's aim then was get people chanting at least and get them initiated. Then everything will become clear after that. So, anybody has any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
So on this topic of initiation, just one thing I was thinking. Today is actually the anniversary of Srila Prabhupada's sannyas initiation. So I was wondering if you had any further elaboration, or if you
can you speak a little louder? I'm a bit.
Hare Krishna?
Yes, better.
I said on this topic of initiation, today is the anniversary of Srila Prabhupada's accepting of sannyas.
Oh, okay.
So I was wondering if you can tell us, enlighten us on that pastime.
Prabhupada taking sannyas. Okay. I hadn't realized this. Was that the 14th? Is that the date? 14th? I thought it was this. Anyway. I do remember when I first joined the Vrindavan temple. I'd been there for the opening. That was my first visit to India. And then after 6 weeks, the opening of the Krishna Balaram Mandir, we went back to our various preaching fields. I went back to Australia. I couldn't settle after I'd been in Vrindavan. So after a couple of months, at the beginning of August, I left Sydney and I went back to Vrindavan and became the temple commander there. So, sorry, what was your question again?
Sannyas ceremony.
Right. So, as soon as I arrived at the gates of Krishna Balaram Mandir, I bumped into a good friend of mine, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. He was also from Australia, but at that time he was back to Richard. So as soon as I got off the Tunga, the horse cart from Mathura railway station, I got down at the gates of Krishna Balaram Mandir. It just happened that Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada was walking out the gate next to me. So as soon as he saw me, he was very happy. And then he grabbed hold of me. I didn't even have a chance to carry my suitcase. He took me to the temple president, Akhayananda Swami. He said, "I've found our new temple commander." I just set foot in the place, and immediately, here's your new temple commander. So I was in charge mainly of, organizing the duties that devotees did, and especially Prabhupada wanted us to keep the temple clean. So we had a system of cleaning the temple. Prabhupada said immediately after Mangalarati, throw water all over the temple, use the squeegees and clean everything. Then again, at 1 o'clock, after the noon arati had finished, you again wash everything. And then again at night, when the temple is just closed, at the end of the arati, then again you wash. So 3 times a day we were cleaning the temple. Prabhupada was very strict about that. So as the temple commander, that was my duty to see those things were going on. I was also in charge of the 24-hour kirtan. So I had this crazy schedule that I would go to sleep for 2 hours, then I'd do some service, then I'd go to sleep for 2 hours, do some service, and then again I'd go at night time, 11 or 12 o'clock at night, I finally get to rest, and then I had to get up again at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning so that to do the 24-hour kirtan, because nobody wanted to do that spot. I couldn't find anybody to get up in the middle of the night, so I did it myself. Anyway, that's a side issue. But as I was cleaning up, I found some scrap of paper, or somebody found it and gave it to me. And Prabhupada had left a number of papers in his room in Radha Damodar. And then, of course, when the Krishna Balaram Mandir opened, Prabhupada moved into his quarters there. So a few months later, somebody found this handwritten sheet, and it was the sannyas mantra. And apparently that was the sheet that was given to Srila Prabhupada when he took sannyas in 1959. And for some reason or another, it was just blowing around on the ground, and myself, I didn't have enough common sense, to take it and keep it. I mean, that was Prabhupada's sannyas mantra. Anyway, so as far as Prabhupada's taking of sannyas, that was in 1959, of course. A couple of godbrothers had advised him, I think Keshava Maharaj gave him the danda, they had advised him that, Abhay Babu, if you're serious about preaching, nobody will take you seriously wearing white. So you should take sannyas, then they'll listen to you. So that was advice that he received from some of his godbrothers. And he followed that. Of course, he'd been living in Vrindavan for several years at that point, and still his family, the youngest son, Vrindavan Chandra Day, the family kept sending him to stay with Prabhupada when he was in Delhi in this Chippiwada place, and also in Vrindavan. And after some time, Prabhupada would send him back. So 2 or 3 times Prabhupada did that, because the reason why the family was sending Vrindavan Chandra to be with Prabhupada was because it was one less mouth to feed. They weren't earning very much money. Prabhupada had given up his whole business. That was, most things from his business had been stolen. So he just took it, this is Krishna's arrangement, give all this, business up, give up all this other stuff. Now just preach, whether or not the daughter's married or not, right? That was that statement, all right, the hell with it. Now it's time to preach. Forget about getting your daughter married. So Prabhupada was very active when he was in Vrindavan. Between Delhi and Vrindavan, he was going up and down, producing Back to Godhead in a newspaper format. He did that for a number of years. Then finally, at the end of the decade, 1959, then he got this impetus to take sannyas. Prabhupada actually told us later on that Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur had appeared to him in several dreams, not just once, but several times, and indicated that now you should take sannyas and come out and preach. So the first couple of times that happened, Prabhupada said, I was, shocked. He said, I couldn't imagine how to leave the family. So, but still, Guru Maharaj has said it, I must do it. So after 2 or 3 indications, Prabhupada actually took sannyas. Vrindavan Chandra Day later on he said that when we heard that Prabhupada had taken sannyas, or when we heard that my father had taken sannyas, he said it was like a shock, like a thunderbolt to them. You know, he was already living, you know, away from the family for many years, but still that, you know, I guess it's part of the Indian, you know, system. To take sannyas, they know that means complete cut-off, no more, you know, association. So they, you know, the ladies are always anxious when their husband might take sannyas. So Prabhupada took sannyas. The news got back to his family. They said it was like a thunderbolt hitting them, that he's actually taken sannyas. Now they knew there was no connection. But still, they were trying to send Vrindavan Chandra Day there to relieve their burden. Prabhupada told him, it's all right, you can come, but you must follow the principles. And of course, he couldn't do it. So then Prabhupada would send him back. So he said 2 or 3 times like that it happened. So Prabhupada, once he took sannyas, he was freed from so many burdens and obligations. And then immediately settled down in the Radha Damodar temple, I think in 1960. They had offered these 2 rooms. Again, I think because he, you know, they knew him, the head priest there, the Mahant. What was his name? Madan Chan Gosai. I just forget the name of the Mahant. But anyway, they knew Prabhupada. And once he took sannyas, then they thought it'd be nice, he can occupy these 2 rooms. And they told him, you know, you don't have to pay anything if you don't want. It needed fixing up a bit. Prabhupada spent some money on, you know, fixing the place. And then he thought, well, the previous tenant, there'd been a previous tenant, he was paying 3 rupees a month rent. So, but I've had to fix this place up with my money, so I'll give them 5 rupees rent per month. So from that time on, he was living in the Radha Damodar, and he was mainly writing, not going out too much, but he did do some programs, but his main business was doing the Bhagavatam, get some volumes of that written, and then he was still thinking how to get to the West. The intention was there, but he didn't see the means for that at that time. When he got to 1965 or end of 64, he had completed the first canto, and then, you know, he was out on this preaching tour. He met this Gopal Agarwal in Mathura. He casually said, I mentioned that I was hoping to go to America somehow or another. And that was it. He never asked him to do anything. But this man took it on his own, you know, initiative to get all the forms that Prabhupada needed for getting a passport. And, you know, there were certain other restrictions because he was penniless. Then the government officials were a bit shy of giving him the stamp. I think there was something called a P form or something at that time. So when Prabhupada went to collect it, the guy behind the counter said, so, sorry Swamiji, we can't do that. You don't have any money or means. So how can we send you to America? So Prabhupada told him, no, don't do like this. He said, let me see your superior officer. So Prabhupada saw the superior officer, and he explained his mission, and the man was very impressed by meeting Prabhupada. So he said, don't worry Swamiji, we'll give you the stamp. So that was how he got out from India and came to America. So as a sannyasi, of course, Prabhupada's profile, if you like, spiritual profile, changed slightly. There's differences in how you conduct yourself under each ashram. And, you know, that was it. He went fairly quickly, he went to America. But the day that he took sannyas, Kinshana Krishna Das Babaji was there. So the next day, Prabhupada said, immediately I went out preaching, because that's what taking sannyas is for. He said, I didn't take sannyas to become retired. He said, I took sannyas so I could increase. And he was already like 63 years old at that time. he was in the Radha Damodar temple for a number of years. They were very happy to have him there. And then, of course, ISKCON grew. And then Prabhupada got the land in Vrindavan and started his mission properly. So I don't know a lot of what Prabhupada was doing during that period. I mean, you can read the Leelamrita. There's Satsvarup Maharaj, they did a lot of research on that. But basically, Prabhupada took sannyas for improving or increasing his preaching work. And that was always his mood there. So that's all I know. I mean, as far as that goes. Was there some other aspect of Prabhupada's sannyas that you wanted to know about? Just some idea.
It was, I guess it relates to the chanting. It was a pastime I heard as far as his initiation itself.
What pastime is that?
It was where he was with the Krishna
Speak loudly.
He was with the Krishna Das Babaji Maharaj.
Yes.
And the yajna was going on, so they started chanting Hare Krishna. And then I guess Keshav Maharaj was telling the crowds, okay, lower it down a little bit, but then Prabhupada motion from the side, no, more chanting, more chanting.
Yeah, okay. I haven't read that for a while. I do remember something like that. Actually, the next day after Prabhupada took sannyas, he got Kinchana Krishna Das Babaji. He told him, now you come with me preaching. Because he would, Kinchana Krishna Das, I mentioned, he was the only disciple that I know of at least, who was given permission by Bhaktivedanta Saraswati to simply chant as his service. So he was always moving between Puri, Mayapur, Vrindavan, and he was always chanting. So he was good friends with Prabhupada. So when he took sannyas, Prabhupada grabbed him and said, now you're coming out preaching. So I think they went to Agra or someplace like that preaching. But Prabhupada's idea was that now I've taken sannyas, I should immediately implement, what that means by going out and preaching. Not that he took sannyas and now he's retired. Yeah, Prabhupada took sannyas for a specific purpose. All right. Any other questions or comments? All right, it's very late. So thank you all very much. We'll continue the narration this evening. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.